All right, a couple things I would like to do today. The first is to go over problem 1 for your test. We'll go over problem 2 on Monday. I'll give you the test back on Monday. I've started to grade them, but I have not finished grading them yet. So the first one was that one for the BMI. Hopefully you didn't find problems with that. I don't know, but hopefully you didn't. So I think what I'll do is I'll just show it to you like this. This is my copy of it. So as you can see, I did not change the interface at all. So when I run this, it still looks just like that. There's basically nothing in it. So let's just take a look at the JavaScript. All right. So what were you told to do here? All right. Have a main that's a driver that only calls the functions below it, and it only asks the user to run the program again. Write a separate function for the height. Write a separate function for the weight. Height must be in a certain range. Weight must be in a certain range. Write a separate function for the calculation to 2 decimal places. Add a new function to determine the BMI status. This isn't something I've come up with. All right. And you'll notice that here, 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 and here, they have asterisks. And on the bottom, and I even mentioned this in class, you were supposed to use constants for those values. All right. Use meaningful variable names, etc. Comment. Put your functions in the external. I made that worth 2 points. All right. So taking it from the top, here are my constants. Again, the minimum height we were told to put in was 12. The maximum was 96. The minimum weight was 1 pound. The maximum weight was 555 pounds. This gets used to say that basically if the BMI that you figured was under 18.5, all right, because again, you were told to use a constant for that. This is if the BMI is over 25. So that's for underweight, that's for overweight. We don't have to check and make one for optimal weight, because if you're not underweight and you're not overweight, by default, you're going to be optimal weight. It's just the way that the program works. All right. So again, we had these last time, the height, the weight, and the BMI. So the new one is the status. All right, and again, as you can see, I did put comments in here. And here's main. In fact, if I go down, that's the whole thing. You're missing a curly brace there, but that's all you can't see. So, very same way I showed you these in class, I used the same variable names and everything, but what I was looking for in here, did you write a separate routine to figure out the height? Did you write a separate routine to figure out the weight? Did you write a separate routine to calculate the BMI? Did you write a separate routine to do the status? Did you write a separate routine to display everything? Does that make sense to everyone? Because again, even if your code was correct, but you didn't write it as separate functions, you will lose points. All right? I mean, that's not a threat, that's not a promise, that's just fact, because those were the requirements. All right, then we ask you person if you want to run it again. We grab just the first character. Hopefully by now, this is making some sense to you. As far as what's going on right here, again, this says just grab the first character. Remember, since we start counting at 0, that's the first character. Then we uppercase it. If we didn't want to do that for whatever reason, all right, we also could have written that, just so you see it, we could have written it like this. So really, did that buy you a whole lot? Well, by putting in the 2 uppercase, it made our checks easier. That's all. All right? Either way here would have worked. All right, to me, this is more work to do it this way. You may or may not agree with that. All right. And like I said, to me, this reads much cleaner this way. Okay. So if the first was not equal to y, again was false. So if you put anything in there other than a y for the first character. These two routines, again, the height and the weight, and I showed you this last time. I didn't change those. I don't think I did, at least. They're identical. All right, I guess we did add the min height and the max height. It's kind of nice when you run a program to have it come out and say something like this. Please enter height between. You get, I've said this to you before, you can't account for human beings, I'm not going to say stupidity, but for human beings not reading directions or whatever. All you can try to do is make it as simple for them as possible. So by using those constants, I put 12 and 96 in here. You'll notice again, if I put something non-numeric, all it does is it asks you to do it again. If I put in something that's out of range, either on the low end or on the high end, all it does, all right? And I don't think I asked you in this one to put an alert in there. Some people find alerts very irritating because when you think about it, really an alert is a pop-up, all right? And some people don't like those, all right? So again, other than changing the H to a W everywhere in here and the H here, all right, to a W down here, those routines are exactly identical to one another. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. The calculation was simple. I said here, if it was not a number for either one, return unable to perform calculation. That shouldn't happen anymore because we put you in a loop here and we put you in a loop here. So by the time you return it, it should be numeric and it should be within range. All right? But it never hurts just to check one last time. Okay? So this was it. And again, you were supposed to return that to fixed. Somewhere in there you needed to put it to 2 decimal places. If you didn't do that, you'll lose some points. All right? And then the status, pretty simple. Again, that meant if it was less than 18.5, it was underweight. If it was greater than 25, it was overweight. If it's not one of those two, it's optimal weight. All right? Again, I could have done something like this. This would have been a little bit of overkill, but I could have said else if this, else BMI stat equal unknown error occurred. Okay? I could have done that too. The advantage of putting in all those error cases is just on the really, really, really remote chance that something goes wrong, you now have an error message. So you can try to track it down. All right? One thing I did not mention to you earlier, but just so you hear this, because I'm trying to be complete here, you'll notice that this line right here, that get height line that's right there, and this line right here, they're identical to one another, except the first one has var, because that's when we're creating the variable. But what you see right here and right here are identical to one another. All right? And this one right here that we did first, this is usually called a priming read. So you might hear that sometime. All right, either from me or reading it in a book or whatever. You ever hear the old saying when you have to prime a pump to like get it ready to start spewing out water? Well, what this says is, hey, if I put a valid value in there to begin with, so if I put a value in between 12 and 96, I never go into this. That should make sense to you by now. If the person keeps putting in valid values for height and valid values for weight, you never go into either one of those while loops. Those two while loops are only being done for validation. All right? And then finally, again, this could be done in a lot of different ways, but I just threw it all, I basically built onto this output string, and you already saw it. So again, you should have run it, and at a minimum, I already showed you that it worked when I put in the bad values, so to speak, or out of range values. 72, 175, that's optimal because it's between 18.5 and 25. Run it again, 72 and 111. That's underweight because it's under 18.5. And then finally, 72, 333, since it's 45.16, since it's greater than 25, it's overweight. So when I check yours, all right, those are basically the numbers I'm going to put in. I'm going to put an invalid height in for weight. I'm going to put an invalid value in for weight. And then once I'm assured that those work okay, I'm going to probably just use those three and make sure they say optimal weight, underweight, and overweight. Okay? There's a pretty good chance, this is the last time we'll work with this in a test. The only way that we might, and you're going to see this after we start going over this particular chapter, is I might have you go back and rebuild this application, but have you rebuild it using the DOM, the Document Object Model. All right? Where you would make it look more like a web app. So in other words, instead of having this butt ugly interface, which is what you have right now, we would have probably over here someplace, we'd have a label that says input height, then there'd be a text box, input weight, there'd be a text box, and over here, you would have a button that would say something like calculate, and when you clicked it, then you clicked it, you'd have another text box here that would say BMI with a label, and one down here that would say status with a label, and then maybe we'd have a clear button. So we might do something like that. If you don't, all right, then you're going to have something similar to that. All right, and I'm not going to lie to you, there's probably a good 50% chance that'll be on your next test. All right. So any questions on either anything I just said, how it's going to be graded, or whatever? All right, then let's jump into Chapter 5. We're actually going to do 3 things for the rest of the period today. It won't take all period. All right. I'm going to lecture on Chapter 5, and that might take quite a while. That might take till about 10:30 or so. Okay, hopefully less than that. Then we're going to go over the, I should have given you, again, all those electronic test reviews. We're going to go over the test review for Chapter 5. All right, and after we get done with that, I'm going to talk to you about the portfolio, but very short, 5 or 10 minutes. All right, found a couple neat tools online that you may like to use. All right, so if you're following along, it looks like we're on page 289. I will tell you that this chapter and the next chapter are long chapters. Okay. What I have for you, and I was going to email it to you, but it's over 11 meg, so it probably wouldn't have worked, and I didn't know if I zipped it if it would work or not. But I mean, I put a bunch of junk out here. This is a thing called DOM. And I found a bunch of stuff. Now, 10 meg of this 11 meg that's in here is this. I actually found an entire book online on how to use the DOM. Okay? Now, I would say that this is the kind of thing, I know, are you going to read through it? You're probably not going to read a lick of it, and that's okay. But if you plan on staying in the web part of the field, you might want to keep this. All right, and it's old. It's 11 years, which in many ways is ancient in computer times. But the concepts are still really good. So 10 meg out of the 11 meg is this. It's like 305 pages, I believe. All right. As far as other stuff that's in there, this, you're probably going to get too bored before you read your way through it, but it's called DHTML Utopia, Modern Web Design Using JavaScript and the DOM, and it's 80 pages long. Okay. So again, you may be interested in that, you may not. I'm going to go from the bottom up. This practice, JavaScript. This is something I found online. All right, so there were some practices, and where are they? They're right here. And what I did was I put it all in there, and then at the end, I put the answer key is in there too. So if you want to look at that. All right. This is from another one from there, and it does a pretty good explanation of explaining what the DOM is. Yeah.
I was looking at the Brad Travers.
Mm.
Yeah, his is a lot closer to what we're doing.
Yes.
But I was looking at like Derek Vance. He was doing like responsiveness with JavaScript. Or
Yeah.
something.
And we've done the responsiveness, we've handled it using Bootstrap
Yeah.
instead of the way that he did it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that this stuff can be taught, but the bottom line is, are you getting the concepts? And most of the concepts are the same in both those.
Okay.
All right.
Is it easier?
Well, that's like the old proverbial question: which one of your kids do you like the most? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It probably depends on the day. All right, type of an idea.
Gotcha.
All right. All right. Here's another one that I found: JavaScript DOM exercises, practices, and solutions. And there's 15 problems in here with solutions. These I'm not even going to open, but these are a couple really pretty good articles called JavaScript in the DOM series, Lesson 1 and Lesson 2. Lesson 1, it's like 16 pages long, probably the first 11 pages. Just reviews all the stuff you've learned in here in JavaScript. And it'd be a really good, review for you. And the last 5 pages or so is just on the DOM, and this whole second article is on the DOM. This one, again, you might have an interest in. Okay, I found a bunch of stuff out here. There's a bunch of resources. And again, if you say, well, I don't have time to look at those, okay. I will tell you, I watched this guy yesterday. Out on YouTube, he's got approximately 16 different tutorials on the DOM, and most of them are about 5 to 10 minutes long. But I wish I had this guy's enthusiasm.
You need a website.
I don't know if
Why
I
not
just
do
wanted
it
you to hear
yourself?
the beginning, and I don't even
With
know if you'll be
Wix,
able to hear
you can
it or
create your
not,
own
but-
professional website.
Hello, so today I'm starting an entirely new section of videos about a topic I really don't know anything about. And I have no business making this video, but I'm going to make an attempt, and you, the internet, will, I don't know why I'm pointing in a aggressive manner. I welcome you with a hug, but you, the internet, will hopefully leave comments and let me know what I've got wrong and what I'm missing.
He also uses this thing
honestly,
called
this is stuff which has been
P5.js,
sort of new to me as well.
which is kind
So,
of
and
a
the topic
thing
is,
where it'll do some sketching for you. It'll write some JavaScript for you. Sorry, if you're interested in that. All right. So, like I said, at the end of the period today, what I'm going to do is on the flash drive that I have, I've got this. There's the thing, DOM, right there. Also, I found that I got sent this book, I guess, online. It's called Jumpstart MySQL. You're not going to use that this semester, but I'd like you to copy that book too, because we'll use that in fall of next year when we start learning the database stuff. So if you did have any desire this summer or whatever to start looking at database, you'd be able to. It's a very generically written book. All right. So again, when you get to that point, and I'll pass it around. In fact, I can just pass it around now. Please copy the DOM one. You've got all these other ones, but please copy the DOM folder and the Jumpstart PDF. All right. So again, we're on Chapter 5. We're on page 289. I will tell you probably this chapter and Chapter 7 are the hardest that we cover in this book. All right? Because some of the stuff that's in here, although it makes sense, there's just a lot of it, some of it's similar. Sometimes there's more than one way of doing it. Sometimes you have to do it different ways for older browsers, etc. All right? But it starts to bring together the whole idea of using JavaScript and CSS and HTML together, because we haven't been really doing a lot of that. All right, but we do more in this here. We start doing it. You've already seen a little bit, but the get element by ID. There's also a get elements by tag name and get elements by class. I think it's class name. A get elements by name, and there's working with selectors. Selectors, it's really important that you read this. Again, if your plan is to be in the web part here, sooner or later you're going to be working on a website where you're going to need to do jQuery. And jQuery works almost solely with selectors. So you get introduced to them in this chapter. All right. The whole thing about working with the document object model is the document object model works with what are called nodes. So again, if I've got an HTML document, all right, so if I have this, okay, There's the root node, HTML. All right, the children that are under the HTML are a head and a body. Under the head, I've got a meta child, another meta child, a title child, a script child, and a script child. Under the body, I've got an input tag. All right, so you start working your way down, and anything that's in there, I've told you this before, anything that's in there, all right, that has an ID, you're able to manipulate programmatically. All right, I didn't get a chance to finish it last night, but I'm hoping to by Monday. We're going to build an entire, it's not going to be anything monumental, but we're going to build an entire web page on Monday, that's my hope at least, that basically we're not going to have in here, this is going to almost be empty. There virtually won't be anything in our body. We're going to build it interactively. So as you start going through the program, it'll write stuff out for you. All right, that's one way of using the DOM. All right, so we'll also talk about how to open up new browser tabs, how to open up windows, some of the stuff that's in here, and because this is on the test, all right, but things like set timeout, set interval, okay? I've given this analogy before. You may or may not like it, but set timeout is like, let's assume that we're told that today at 10 o'clock we're going to have a fire drill. Okay, so 10 o'clock comes, you hear the thing going off, we go downstairs, etc. Okay, so when you set a timeout, basically what you're saying is this is a one-time shot. When the time is expired or when something happens, something happens. All right, let's say that what we decided we're going to do is it was pouring outside and we're not going to have the fire drill today. So not only is there a set timeout, there's a clear timeout. Okay, all right, on the other hand, notice we've got interval. Back in the olden days, like in the 90s, no joke, but before even Word became big, and you may have heard of this product before, I think it's still out there, the biggest word processing package was WordPerfect. All right, and with WordPerfect, for a while at least, what happened was, if you didn't remember to save every like 10 or 15 minutes, it automatically saved for you. You'd see a message at the bottom of your screen, document saved. That was a set interval. So that every 15 minutes, something happened automatically. So if you still are confused with a timeout, pretend that it's the old-fashioned type of alarm clock that you wind up. All right, if you remember those, it goes off. It's 6 o'clock. It goes off. You turn it off. There's no snooze on it. It's a one-time shot. But today, if you got a clock radio or something like that, or a more up-to-date alarm clock, you got a snooze button. So you hit it, 9 or 10 minutes later, it goes off again. You hit it, 9 or 10 minutes later. That's an interval. Finally, we'll talk about the history object, which allows you to go back and forth in pages. All right, the location object allows you to work with URLs. Navigation, which allows you to navigate your way around. So we're going to hit on all of those. And again, I would strongly suggest that you take your time going through the exercises that are in the chapter. If you go through the exercises, you shouldn't really have a problem with a test. All right? Now it gets a little confusing because they talk about the BOM and they talk about the DOM. So the first thing they talk about here is the BOM, the browser object model. All right, why do you want to care about what the BOM is? Well, for one reason that you might want to care what the BOM is this right here is on your test. You are asked on there, what is the BOM? All right. In fact, if you look at this, where it says it describes the relationship between objects within the web browser, and you look at what I've got, well, it's in here someplace. There. I basically just took it out of here. All right. Now, don't worry so much about writing it down, but look at this picture. That's the BOM. And the key thing to understanding this is there can be stuff underneath each one of these. Does that make sense to everybody? It's totally possible. But if you look right here, please look up on the screen. See the one that's blue? Everything that's underneath there, that's the DOM. So the BOM is bigger The DOM is smaller. The DOM is part of the BOM. All right, I know that sounds kind of goofy, but just so you understand what's going on. So the browser object model includes the window, the history, the location, the navigator, the screen, and the document. The DOM is everything under the document. All right, yes.
It's under the other ones.
It's typically not a whole heck of a lot. Like I said, with the history, you might have the ability to go forward and backwards to see different pages that are in there. The location might be a list of URLs, etc. All right. So as it says, the document object is the most important object that's in here. We haven't done much of this, but if you use document.write, just so you know, that literally writes something to a web page. So again, if we create something as a class next week, maybe we'll do something with document.write. I don't know. So as it says, the document object branch is referred to as the document object model, also known as the DOM. You can go out online. You don't have to do this. I've done part of this for you. But under that, disk that I have going around, there are some presentations, some URLs for presentations out there. I don't know if you saw it, but Dominic passed it to you. So it's there if you want to keep it going. But there are a lot of really good presentations that are out there. They're only about 10 minutes long. So if you want a really good initial exposure to this, you can just go out to YouTube. Like I said, some of them I've got there. All right. Some of the ones I got out there are a lot longer than that. Now they mention in here that when you combine HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you get what's called DHTML, which stands for Dynamic HTML. That's not even used much anymore. When I say it's not used much, I mean the word. Because it's assumed that basically every website that you create today will be interactive in some form or other. In other words, it's not going to be where we have just the home page, just the contact page, just an about page, and that's it, and there are no links, there's nothing that happens. All right? Because that's not typically how it works today. And they mentioned that the DOM is an example of what's called an API, or an application program interface. I've given you this definition before. You may or may not like it, but basically what an API is, it's like a contract. All right, before I started at Rankin, I had to sign a contract. Makes sense, right? And there were certain things in that contract I had to agree to. Things that were not in the contract, but that I had to agree to, they told me to look in the manual. All right? And it's funny because it's like whatever you call this on my face, all right, you can have a beard, but you literally can't come in here and start having a beard. Charles sees that. He may tell you, I don't know if there's enough there, or he might not. All right? But with an API, it's a software contract. What happens is the software says, I'm going to provide all this functionality to you. You don't have to sign the contract, but if you want to use the functionality, you've got to agree to use it the way that I'm telling you to use it. Does that make sense? All right. I almost got fired at my last job because I was teaching a class that was way too hard for students. How do I know that? Because it was way too hard for me. And I was still presenting the material, we were still doing stuff, but they weren't getting it at all. And I thought the more I taught it, the worse I was getting at it. So what I did was I started teaching something else in that class. It was related, but not the same, okay? Then one of the students who took that class applied for a job, and they said, oh, you've taken this. And he's like, yeah, what'd you learn? And he started telling them, and they're like, that's not really what they, So these people contacted the school I was at. I got called in by my boss at the time, who said, okay, I'm not being accusory, but I have to ask you, according to all of the paperwork, this class teaches this. Did you teach that? And I said, sort of. He said, that's not really an answer. I said, more no than yes. If it wouldn't have been the boss I had at the time, I probably would have been fired. all right, for teaching something that was against what I was supposed to be teaching. Why? Because I broke the contract. All right, you can look at it that way, because I did. All right, so with an API, it's basically a contract between you and the software. As it says, the DOM represents the HTML of a web page that's displayed in a browser. It's displayed in a hierarchical type of way that's known as a DOM tree. Now, I've shown you this before, but I'm going to show it one more time. That if you look at it, here's an example. I'm just picked this one out. It's no better or worse than any of the other ones. But that's an example right there of a DOM tree. It's not complete, all right, but you've got a table. The table has one child, which is the table body. The table body has two children, which are both rows. Each row has two children that are both data, and each one of those has a child. All right? So what the DOM represents is it's a graphical representation of your web page. All right? And what you're able to do is anything that's in there to which you've associated a class or an ID, you can now manipulate it programmatically. That's what the DOM is all about. It's interactivity. It's because people are not happy today. You know, it's the old idea that you don't, how many of you go to a website that has no pictures or no images, nothing at all in it, that's just text? And you go there on a regular basis. Most sites like that aren't going to survive. Does that make sense? Because most of us, you know, you don't like to just sit there. You know, this book is a better book because it has pictures. And I don't mean because there's less for you to read, but it shows what things should look like. All right? What's the old saying? A picture's worth 1,000 words type of mentality. All right? So again, you're going to go through it. This might even be a better example. All right, this is what's shown in the book. I guess I didn't even notice this one was in there. And it's on page 294. In order to work with the stuff that's in here, first of all, do you notice a bunch of the stuff that's down on the bottom? Do you see where it's got a color in here? It's either green or it's kind of brown. I don't know, whatever you call that. It says text and it says attribute. Those things are known as leaf nodes, L-E-A-F. You can see it. Don't go any farther down in the tree. You've reached the bottom. So for instance, if I was doing my family tree, all right, that it would end right now with my 3 daughters because none of them are married. All right, I'm thinking that my one daughter might be by this time next year. I don't know. So then her tree will expand. That should make sense to you. All right, and that's exactly what we're talking about right here. In order to be able to do this, these are the things, not the only ones, but these are the major things that you're going to end up, using. You've already seen get element by ID. We haven't used it much, but you've already seen it. You'll see it more in this chapter. All right? Again, notice that this one right here only returns one thing because it's an element. This returns multiple things. This returns multiple things. This returns multiple things. This returns multiple things. Because this one is elements, 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 and all. Why am I telling you that? Because that's on your test. Basically, it says which of these only returns one thing, and it's the get element by ID. So please remember that. All right? Now, when you start working with this stuff, whoops, 295. These have different properties that you can work with. It says the DOM object has various properties for manipulating these. This is not an extensive list. All right, this is not an extensive list on 296. I will tell you that if I go out here to Google and I type in DOM tutorial, one of the first ones that comes up is this one. I thought this was good. I went through this. This is right from W3 Schools. They explain what the DOM is. They explain what you can do with it. And then they go through here. And as you start going through it, I just want to show you this. They give you a simple example. And then they give you, it's about 15 or 20 examples that are in here. All right? And again, like I said, it's pretty good. trying to reach a certain page here. No, I can't find it right now. But it says test yourself with exercises. This is how you learn this stuff. It's not listening to me talk about it, but it's you going in here and trying it. So between this and doing the exercises in the chapter, hopefully you'll have a pretty good idea. All right? This is a harder concept to explain using words. It's much easier to explain it using pictures. All right. So the first thing they start talking about then on the top, bottom of page 296 and the top of 297, it says, let's imagine, so this would be some kind of a text box, right? Its type is number and its ID is zip. That's probably not what you'd use for a zip, because if you wanted to put in that dash 4 numbers at the end, you can't put a dash in there. But you could still put in if they were just all numbers. The point is this, the key part is this. That's the ID. You all know that. All right? So now when we go to the next page, now we can do this. Now we can take anything that's in that zip code field and we can manipulate it, and we can manipulate it programmatically, because what we're saying is, I don't want to refer to it like this. Let me refer to it like this. Because it's much easier to type zip field. There's nothing special about field. We could have just called it zip. But it's much easier to type that than it is to type all this. All right? So now you're able to go in and start to manipulate this stuff. So as it says, you're going to create event listeners for a photo gallery application using element by ID. So you run through that. There are a boatload of the examples that you do in the chapter in here, and some of them are pretty long. They're 3, 4, 5 pages long. All right. So the next one that we can do, get elements by tag name. This says return every paragraph that I have. Does that make sense? So what you say in here is get elements by tag name, then either in single or double quotes, you put in there the HTML element. If I wanted all the divs, that would be the word div in there. And it's case insensitive, but most of the time, most people put it in lowercase. All right? So what that does is that literally returns a collection of these in an array. So you can go and traverse your way through the array to find all of them. So if you wanted to know everything that was in there. All right? Now, notice what they have here. They're saying get elements by tag name, all the H1s, but they're asking for just the number 1. Since it's an array, that'll be the second H1 tag. If we wanted the first H1 tag, it would be a 0 there instead of a 1. All right? And again, this is the bottom of page 299 in the book. Now, notice what it says here. It says the method that you have right here returns a collection of objects. All right? Depending on the browser, this collection may either be a node list or an HTML collection. A node list is an indexed collection of nodes. In other words, it's an array of everything you're looking for. All right? But nodes is an index collection of p tags, whereas an HTML collection is an index collection of all of the text that are within those p tags. See the difference? All right? And if you don't, like I said, it's going to be more and more important as you go on in here that you read the book, because all that stuff is given in the book. So there's another exercise, again, fairly long, 300 and 301. And then after that, then they start saying, okay, if you don't like get element by name, you can do a get element by class name. You already know what the difference between those are. I can take the same class and I can assign a class name to a paragraph and to an H1 tag and to a div, correct? So if let's say that I called all those, I gave them a class that was called, green, which would be a dumb name, but I did it anyway. Now I could come in here and do a get elements by class name, and I could put green in here. And it would show me that H1 tag and that paragraph tag and that div. All right, so if I want everything of one type, all the divs, all the p tags, etc., then I use get elements by name. If I want to do it by class, I do it this way. All right, but both of those are elements because they're plural. And the first one that we looked at for ID is get element because it's singular. That should all make sense to you by now. It really should. All right, we've hit on this stuff for a pretty long time. There's also, as it says, a get elements by name. Now notice it says, it's one of those things that says the preceding three methods are generally more useful. What that means in English is, this is one you're probably not going to use as often. But the author says on the bottom of 301, going to the next page, however, get elements by name can enable you to create more concise code. So it may end up with you writing less code. That's what they're getting to. All right? Bottom line is this, and I've told you this before. You right now, because this is programming, you should be trying to program for understandability. It should make sense to you. Whatever way you use, whichever one of these you use, should be the one that's most understandable. All right, when you're doing your own stuff. On a test, of course, if you're told to grab all of the, everything that's in class green, then you'd want to do a get elements by class name. If it was to grab all of the div tags, it would be get elements by whatever it was. All right? All right. This, right now, when they start talking about this query selector, this is starting to bridge the gap between regular JavaScript and the JavaScript library, jQuery. There is a chapter in this book on jQuery. There's just not enough time in this class to go over it. If you want at least a little bit of an introduction to it, I did go over the PowerPoints for the chapter. If you ever want to look at those, they're out there on YouTube. All right. So when you do the query selector, all right, so again, notice we took this image now, and you know that an image, it's mandatory that you put a source in there. You could say, well, what about the alt tag and the height and the weight, or in the width rather? They should have put those in, but they didn't. I think they're just trying to keep it simple. But the point is, there's a class here that's called logo. All right? Now, as it says, we could reference the image using the query selector as follows. What this means is, I want all images that are inside of an H1 tag that are inside of a header. Does that make sense? Because it's really, really important. If I left off the header in the H1, it would say select all images regardless of where they are on the page. But what we're doing is we're giving it a hierarchy. It says all of these are in here and all of these are in here. So parent, child, grandchild, whatever you want to call it. All right? So this is the kind of stuff that you end up using. So what does this say? It says, assuming this is the only nav in the document, this would give you all of the LIs that are in all of the ULs that are in the navs. What if I had more than one nav? Then I'd have to give that nav an ID. And then I would, instead of having nav here, I would have pound something or other. Good God. It's going to come back. All right. Now, that's all fine and dandy. On the bottom of page 303, they start talking about the text content. As it says, you can use that to access and change the text an element contains. Maybe the most important sentence, at least so far in this chapter, is the one on the bottom of 303 that goes on to 304. It says here, in practice, the main difference between inner HTML and text content is that inner HTML allows you to access and write HTML tags along with text, while text content strips these out. Why that's important? You can use either this text content property or inner HTML to write stuff to a web page. You can use either one. The funny thing about inner HTML is that's the one almost everybody uses. They almost never use this text content. It's almost never used. You almost never see it in there. All right? But people almost always use inner HTML. But the funny thing about that is inner HTML isn't a standard. It's something that got added in an earlier version that basically everybody just uses. All right? But there's always that warning, hey, it's not a standard, so in the future somebody could decide to get rid of it. It's not going to happen. All right? Chances are all the time that you're working in your careers, it won't happen because there are millions, if not billions, of lines of code out there that use it. All right? They're not going to change that. So they go through here and they show you how to use the text content. Then they talk about the inner HTML, and they're going to show you an example of that also. It's in here someplace. Now there was, I glossed over, we're going to take a break in just a minute, but notice the note that's on the bottom of 304. If you need to add an element within an existing element in the DOM tree, all right, it says the standard method is to directly create and append it rather than using the inner HTML property. There are some books that will tell you you should use the inner HTML or text content as little as possible. There's other books by other authors on the same topic that will use it whenever they feel like it. All right, so there's not a lot of universal agreement on how all of this stuff should be done. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, by and large, whenever you want to do something, there's multiple ways of doing it. All right? All right. If you want to be able to access something, this is the kind of stuff that you end up writing. It says, the following statement changes the value of the display property to none. So what this says is, okay, go through my document, find an ID of logo, and for its styling and its display, make it none. What in English, what that means is logo is probably some kind of a graphic. Probably is logo. It means make it not visible. All right. Now think about why you would want to do that. And I'm going to give you an example. Probably not a good one, but it's the one that came to mind. Let's assume that it's a few years from now, and Rankin decides that for whatever reason, it wants a different logo. One logo for their St. Louis campus, one logo for this campus, and one logo for the Perryville campus. And they all look the same, but the one for St. Louis has got Rankin and it's got STL. The one for here, it's got Rankin and it's got WTZ. And the one for Perryville has got Rankin and it's got PER. Okay? So let's say when it comes, when your web page comes up, none of them show. But you're asked, you're presented with a drop-down list. And it says, which campus are you interested in attending? So you choose Wentzville. As soon as you choose that, now it appears. Does that make sense? So to make it not appear initially, you do something like this. Then you could change the display when you wanted it to appear. So you can do this and you can put anything that's in here. This can be a get elements by ID. It can, typically that's the way you do it. Because you typically don't want to be manipulating a bunch of stuff at once with the CSS properties, but you might. If I wanted to be able to change the background color for all my H1 tags to red, I could do this, all right? And I could do a get element by tag name, H1 there, and I could come in here and .bg color, and I could set it equal to red. That's pretty darn powerful stuff, all right? Because it allows you to change a lot of stuff at one time. All right. Now, they're talking here, it says, okay, this is going to allow us to get some kind of a hyperlink. If we want to know what that hyperlink references, notice that we put this in there. Do you notice that when we did this, we have this of this dot. What that means, the dots mean that you're working with classes in your work or IDs and with properties. All right? So this is the display property, probably of the style class. This is the href property. So you're going to be working with properties more and more and more as you go on with this stuff, just so you know. All right? And they talk a little bit about that in here. I'm not, again, I don't want to go on. I want to finish a page or two, then we're taking a break. All right? So again, you're given another example you have to run through on 307 and 308. And it says to create the populate figures function to change the source. All right? My hope is what you're not doing in here is, okay, here's another one. I got to type in this. I got to type in this. Yeah, it looks like it does in the picture. I can go on. But the idea is that you're spending at least a little time trying to look at the code and figure out what it's doing. All right? All right, this is a good place to take a break. So we're on 3:08. We'll stop right here. We'll pick it up. Let's make it about 9:12. It's 9:01 right now.